Did everybody grab a packet as you came in, or did David hand you one? If not, you're going to need it because it is an interactive presentation today. So I want you to be sure to have what you need before we get started. Well, I want to thank you all this afternoon for inviting me to be here today. This is such a wonderful invitation, and I want to thank Melinda so much for allowing me to come and be here today with the cohort for the workshops and our conversation that was so rich. I found it so encouraging, and I hope that our other cohort pastors enjoyed it as well. I want to thank also the Center for Vocation and Rural Ministry here at Barton and Barton College. I want to thank the Lily Endowment, who's made this generosity, that their generosity has made today possible. And I also wanted to offer a special welcome to David Rockefeller, which you met a minute ago, who's a board member for PNCC. Thank you. So, to give you a brief introduction to Pastors for North Carolina Children, we are a nonpartisan, ecumenical nonprofit that mobilizes faith communities to advocate for public education across the state. We are one of 10 states that are part of the Pastors for Children network that began in Texas in 2013 and has spread across the Southeast. Pastors for North Carolina Children began in 2019, and we are working hard to connect congregations and community groups from Murphy to Manteo and everywhere in between to be able to support our state's children and the public schools that help them flourish. You should have a couple of handouts, and there is a QR code, if you're familiar with those. At the bottom of this page, there's a QR code. I have a PowerPoint for today's presentation that I'm not going to be using, but is related to it. If you want to look at it later to see links or charts or graphs, you can scan that with your phone, like you're going to take a picture and a link should pop up on the screen. That also is a way to connect to our newsletter, our social media, any other information. And before I forget, April 22nd, we are having a our schools, our faith, our public education summit in Raleigh at Edenton Street Methodist. The information is in the link, the QR code. David and the Congregations for Children and the United Women of Faith are hosting that, and we're really excited to continue the learning, and that is open to all. So we hope you join us. Registration is due by this Sunday, though, so have to do that. I also want to mention our Mission Amplify, which I'll be talking a little bit about later. But our Mission Amplify curriculum, you can find more information in the QR code. And if you'd like to take it home with you today, I do have some bags available. So, before we get started, as I said, today's lecture is participatory. So I have a question to get started, and I want you to share your answer. How many of you have ever heard the word Leandro? So one shows you've never heard of it before. It doesn't mean anything. 5, you're an expert. Where would you place yourself on the scale? I see some 3s, some 2s, some 1s. Okay, so we're all over the scale. 2, 2. Excellent, excellent. He's moved up a couple spots this afternoon, so that's exciting. My goal is to help you get to the next number on the scale so that you'll be more aware of what we're talking about. So, also, there's a half sheet of paper that's your lecture feedback sheet. Go ahead and mark the number that you shared on your sheet with your pen, and I'd like you to turn those in at the end, with or without your name, but turn those in at the end. This is for grant purposes for us, for feedback, and just helping us to continue to improve. So as I prepared for today's lecture, I was struck by the timing of the event and how it connects to the story of education in North Carolina. This week, as many of us I'm sure know, is Holy Week. It's the week between the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem and on Palm Sunday and Jesus' resurrection on Easter. The Last Supper with his friends, the death on the cross, and then we wait to hear about the women who find the tomb empty. It's a week of huge emotions. We've the highest highs, the lowest lows, all of that's happening this week. And it's a week of already not yet. It's already happened, but yet it's not yet happened. It's only Tuesday. We're not to Sunday yet. We're in the midst of this experience of liminal space, this transition time. It's a week of just kind of how do we feel, where are we, what's going on? At least in my tradition, that's the case. And we know Sunday's coming, but for now, we have to sit in the discomfort of today's waiting. So I'm a Moravian pastor, and Moravians often we haven't been heard of before, so I wanted to just share we're a Protestant denomination that comes out of the present-day Czech Republic and Germany, and we trace our history back to 1457. We're very similar to the United Methodists and Lutherans, so we're not some crazy backwoods group of some sort. But we are small as a denomination, and we're worldwide. One of our annual traditions that the Moravians partake in across the world is that during the week of Holy Week, we spend each evening rereading the scriptures to hear Jesus last week, to hear the story again. And last night, as I sat with my congregation on Zoom now, reading the story from Monday night, we heard from Matthew 21. We heard how Jesus approaches the temple and has holy anger at the exploitation of the poor by flipping the tables in the temple. You know the story probably. He goes in, gets so angry, he flips the tables. This image of Jesus really resonates for me as I experience those feelings of holy anger as I watch the North Carolina General Assembly year after year, decade after decade, exploit and neglect our state's children and the education that they are guaranteed by the North Carolina Constitution. The title that I gave for today's lecture is, "And How Are the Children?" It comes from the Maasai greeting in Eastern Africa. This group of people often greet one another by inquiring, how's your village? How's your family? How are the crops? How's the weather? And how are the children? They know that how a person is doing is reflected in how the village treats the children. We know that our communities are reflected in how we treat our children. In a village where the children are well, everyone is well. In a village where the children are unwell or lack needed support, the whole village is suffering. So how are North Carolina's children and education today in North Carolina? Well, I'm sad to report that our children are not well. Within North Carolina today, in the most current statistics I could find, 1 in 6 children birth to 18 face food insecurity or hunger. It's almost 400,000 children. 18% of our children, or 412,000, are living in poverty. That's poverty designated by the federal government, which is really a low number. It takes a lot to hit that number to be considered poor. 16 to 17% of our families with children in 2020 had little or no confidence in their ability to pay their next month's rent or mortgage on time. 23% of children who are 3 to 17 live with at least one emotional, behavioral, or developmental condition. 457,000 children in our state. 3,600 children lost a caregiver to COVID as of this October. We have 12,000 children in North Carolina living in foster care, and there's a significant need for foster families. And for the past 29 years, North Carolina's children have been living with an education system that is not meeting the basic needs or the basic requirements to provide a sound basic education, which is what our North Carolina Constitution requires. We know our children are not okay. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. The news about mental health continues to be on our news. We have concerns that are rising. Hunger and housing are continuing to be concerns. The list goes on. And the reality is that our public schools have become the places that provide the social safety net for so many of our children because we've had cuts in funding so many other places too. To clarify, when I talk about public schools, I'm referring to the traditional public schools in our communities that are accountable to the local districts and the State Department of Public Instruction. These are the schools that receive funding from our public tax money and must meet standards set out for the schools by the state. These are the schools in the districts that we think of. Public schools are a public good. It is good for all of us. All of our communities need educated people. It is good. Education allows our children to flourish and to grow. And our traditional public schools are required by law to serve every single child in the community. They cannot discriminate or exclude a child because they may be more costly or more difficult to educate. So let's take a moment to see how much you know about public schools in North Carolina. It's pop quiz time. You'll find one of your papers, there's a quiz, but don't worry, I'm not going to grade it. But we are going to take just a moment to take your pen and your paper. There's 9 questions, and I invite you to answer the questions. See what you know about North Carolina schools. We are talking about schools. You had to expect a quiz, right? Do you need more time, or are you ready to start going over the answers? Well, I don't want to take a whole lot more time because I don't want to miss the rest of my lecture. But let's go ahead and go over some of the questions. So number 1, who has the answer for number 1? Anybody want to call out the answer? What letter is it? It's C. North Carolina has 1.5 million school children. 80% of those attend traditional public schools. For number 2, it's B. North Carolina has 115 local education agencies or districts. We have 100 counties, 115 districts. For number 3, it's A. Our state has 174,000 educators and support staff. Within that, 95,000 are classroom teachers. When I looked at the statistics at the end of August, there were 4,400 vacancies listed in North Carolina, about 4.5%. As of February, there were over 5,000 vacancies. Usually that number goes down from August to Christmas. This year it did not. Number 4. Nope. Trick question. It's D. 55 counties in North Carolina have the public school as their top employer. If you look at the top 3 employers in the county, that's 94 of our 100 counties in the state. That's a significant number of our neighbors. When we look at the vacancies and the number of employee spots, our education schools in our colleges have had a 28% drop in students applying are becoming education majors in the last couple of years since 2008. 28% drop. So these vacancies and these jobs are just not getting filled because there's nobody to fill them. That is a tremendous concern as a mom of 2 children in public schools. Who are their teachers going to be in the coming years? Number 5, A, 40% of our state budget is spent on education. That's about $39.5 billion. Our education budget in North Carolina is our single largest expenditure among all of the big categories. Though in 1970, North Carolina spent 52.5% of our state budget on education. Now we spend 40%. 6 is B. 64% of our public school budgets come from the state. Now, if you grew up in a state other than North Carolina, this may be unusual. Most states have local funding be the main source of funding. In North Carolina, we don't do that. Our state funding is the primary source of funding. It provides all of our teacher salaries, or almost all of them, the supplies, materials, all of the stuff and the people you need to be able to run a school. Now, our local districts, or our local counties, provide about 25% of the funding. That's infrastructure, buses, buildings, HVAC systems, all of those things that we pay a lot more attention to these days post-COVID or in COVID. And then our federal government contributes the last 10%. And that goes towards things like IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which the federal government has never fully funded. It also covers things like the school meal program to provide breakfast and lunch. It covers Title I funding for low wealth schools. And it also covers career and technical education. So your classes in high schools that offer like shop or auto repair or HVAC type classes. Number 7, it's B. We have experienced a 6% decrease since 2008 when we account for growth and inflation. Yes, you hear on the political ads on television that we're spending more on education than we ever have before. Yes, we are, because we're educating more children. And everything's more expensive. Yes, we are spending more. And you know what? We're still not spending enough. It's decreased 6%. That's not basic math. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. And our schools and our children are seeing that. In addition, our pure per pupil spending has dropped 10% since 2008 when we account for inflation. Now, this is the one that makes me angry. North Carolina is 50th in funding effort. We are dead last. I have the chart in the PowerPoint to show you. Funding effort, for me, and from what I've been able to understand with not being a statistics major and so on, is that it's the percentage of our education funding compared to our state's gross domestic product. It is the best apples to apples comparison that you can provide from state to state, because of the cost of living differences, because of the inflation differences, because of size differences. It's hard to compare, exactly teacher salary or student per pupil spending. Those are comparisons and they're helpful, but we are dead last in an apples to apples comparison. Now, we think about our schools in number 8, the buildings, which aren't technically paid for by the state, but the answer is D. As of last September, a year and a half ago now, there was $12.8 billion in unmet school construction need in our state. And the worst part is that some districts, when they do this survey every 5 years, have stopped reporting the true value of their unmet need because they know they're never going to get it. So we know that that number is low. And that's not something our local counties can make up the difference. We need a state school bond. We haven't had one in over 20 years. They used to do one every decade or more. We haven't had one. And then last, number 9 is A. Currently, and I actually didn't check this last week. I'm sure it's gone up because it continues to grow. We have $6.5 billion as a state sitting in the bank that's extra surplus money. Though I do quabble with the word surplus, because a surplus implies that all needs have been met. And we know the needs have not been met for our children. So it is not a surplus. It is money that has been taken from our children and put in the bank for safekeeping. That's our money. That's our tax money. That's our children's money. That's not the rainy day fund. That's not the hurricane relief fund. That is money that was just not appropriated and was extra more than they thought would come in. This is not a money issue. We have the money. I included Wilson County school statistics at the bottom there so you can see a comparison for the county. And earlier I asked you if anyone had heard of Leandro. Leandro is the name of the landmark education funding case in North Carolina. It began in 1994 when I was in 8th grade. I was in middle school in Winston-Salem, and I'm getting ready now to send my own child off to middle school this year. That's 29 years that this case has still gone on. And we know it didn't start 29 years ago. It had to have started before that because they had to get the case together to create the class action suit. This has been going on now for 3 decades. "29 years of litigation to ensure that North Carolina's children have what the Constitution of North Carolina guarantees them. This case is not over. Families from 5 low-wealth counties in eastern North Carolina sued the state of North Carolina in 1994. They claimed that the children were not getting an equal education because of the lack of funding and support that the state was providing to rural counties. The Leandro family from Hoke County's name appeared first on the case, so it became known as the Leandro case. The counties were Hoke, Halifax, Vance, Cumberland, and Robeson. A few years later, more counties joined in, and it became a statewide case covering all of North Carolina's children. Now it has meandered through the courts. We've made progress, we've fallen back. We've made progress, we've fallen back over the 29 years. But it has won every single time it's been to court. Every single time. The North Carolina Supreme Court has heard it 3 times. And it won. Most recently back in November. North Carolina has an obligation to provide a minimum level of education to every child, and we're not doing it. And our children are suffering while we wait. Now, during 2020 and 2021, a plan was developed to identify exactly what was required to achieve this sound basic education that's guaranteed by the Constitution. The West Ed report put recommendations together and researched to name exactly what we need for students. Then the courts adopted it, naming it the Comprehensive Remedial Plan, or we call it the Leandro Plan for short, which creates a roadmap for how to meet the requirements and puts a dollar amount on it to get us there in 8 years. It's an 8-year plan that steps us up. Currently, we're in year 3. The General Assembly is only currently providing about half of the funding required, and they're still fighting in court to get out of having to pay the rest of it. Now, I want to be clear, being a nonpartisan organization, both major political parties are guilty of not doing what is necessary to fund public education and support our children. Both parties have been in power during the Leandro case. Both parties have had the opportunity to fix this. Both parties could have done what was needed. Neither has solved the problem. And while they debate and sue and talk about who can tell who what to do, can the courts tell the legislature what to do or not, which is basic to democracy, our children suffer. The Leandro Plan, just to be very clear, is to get us to a basic minimum level of funding. We are not asking for a world-class education for our children. That's not even on the table at this point. That's not even part of the conversation. We just need to get them out of the basement and to the first floor. As the psalmist declares, how long must we sing this song? When the Leandro Plan is fully implemented, Wilson County schools are set to receive a 42% increase in annual funding. That's not a one-time infusion. That's every year. Can you imagine what the schools here would look like and what you would be able to do to help our children flourish if you received 42% more each year? And that's the money that you're owed in Wilson County. That is money the government is not giving you that you have earned and you are owed. We could hire more counselors. We could hire more social workers, psychologists, and nurses to actually meet recommended ratios and care for our kids' needs. A frequent saying I hear in education is Maslow before Bloom. We must meet our children's basic needs for food and shelter and safety and security. That's Maslow's hierarchy. Those basic things must be met before children can learn. Our schools are one of the main places that ensure that our children have these needs met so that they indeed can bloom. Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives describes the various levels of thinking from basic to more advanced concepts. When the Leandro Plan is fully implemented, our educators will actually be able to help our children bloom and grow forever and focus on that instead of just having to try to meet basic needs that so many teachers spend so much time having to do because they don't have the social workers and the psychologists and the nurses and the adults in the building to help also support the kids. When our public schools have funding and resources that they need to support our students' emotional, behavioral, physical, and developmental needs, our children will flourish. Then, and only then, will we be able to say our children and our communities are well. So what can we do to ensure that our children have what they need? In the education and advocacy circles that I've worked in over the last decade, I began to realize that one of the real needs was to have faith leaders and faith communities speaking up in support of our children. I saw problems in the schools when my own son entered kindergarten and realized things have changed so much from when my mom was teaching. I spent a lot of time as a teacher's kid in her classroom helping do bulletin boards and cut out letters and grade papers and all kinds of things growing up. And things are very different now. As I studied and I listened more, I came to realize the problems that I was seeing in my one school were not just in my school. It's every district and every county across the state. It's a statewide systems problem, not just an individual school problem. Our schools are not failing. Our schools are not failing. Do not hear that narrative and believe it. It's not true. Our schools are underfunded, they're under-resourced, and they are underappreciated. They are not failing. The problems we see are because the system is broken. Or, if we're really truthful, the system is working exactly as it's designed. It's just designed badly to benefit some children at the expense of others. The system is unsustainable and harmful for everyone. We must change the system to ensure every child gets what they need to thrive. I'm curious, this is another raise your hand moment. How many of your congregations have partnerships with a local school of any sort? Most. Have you ever provided school supplies, gone in and done tutoring, helped with teacher appreciation, helped clean up the yard? All kinds of things that churches go in and help do. When I began Pastors for North Carolina in 2019 as a response to my research and my experiences as a parent, I did that because I realized that despite all the good work that our churches are doing and our communities are doing, the systemic problems were too large to address one church and one school at a time. We are never going to charity our way out of a situation when justice or systems change is needed. Our public schools, our students, our staff need people of faith speaking up for them. Why? Because we are people of faith. We are believers in love. We are practitioners of hope. We are purveyors of community and neighbor and care for one another as we care for ourselves. Our viewpoint, shaped and based on faith, love, and hope, is desperately needed today, especially in the halls of Jones Street in Raleigh, which is where the legislature is. When we listen to Luke 10's parable of the Good Samaritan and claim others as our neighbors, we turn this word on its head. We are making a radical theological statement. Rabbi Joachim Prince is quoted as saying, "Neighbor is not a geographic term. It is a moral concept." Every single child in North Carolina is our neighbor. As Christians, we also hold to the belief that every single child contains within them the spark of God, the Imago Dei. We believe that every single child is worthy of love and care. We believe that every single child needs their basic needs met in order to flourish. My own 8 and 11-year-olds are no more special and no more worthy of having their basic needs met. They are no more worthy of receiving a quality education because they have white parents who got college educations and live in affluent Raleigh. That shouldn't make a difference. My kids contain the same Imago Dei that I believe every single child contains. Thus, if a school or a situation is not good enough for my own kids, it's not good enough for any child, period, end of story, stop. If school lunch is not good enough for my own kid, it's not good enough for any child. If a revolving door of subs trying to cover classes and positions that a school can't fill with a full-time hire is not good enough for my own child, which is how we started the beginning of the year, it's not good enough for any child. Every single child deserves to have their needs met and have what is necessary to thrive. And it's our job to ensure that that happens. We believe that it's our job to bring heaven to earth and to build communities that reflect the beloved vision that Jesus Christ set forth in our world. That's what the prayer Jesus taught us is about, the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's revolutionary, not just for ourselves, but for our whole communities and our world. As my friend Reverend Lisa says, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, but it bends only because we bend it. So you may be asking, how do we bend the arc? Well, I'm so glad that you asked me. I mentioned earlier that we live in this already not yet. This in-between liminal space of Holy Week and how that reminds me of education. That's because we're currently living in this already not yet of Leandro. The courts have already acted. but the legislature has not fully funded Leandro. We are in this in-between space, waiting for those in power to do what is right by our children and fully implement the Leandro plan. Well, as a pastor, I feel it's my obligation and my duty to share good news with you today. These problems that we see around us in education, they're solvable. North Carolina has the research and the knowledge of what needs to be done to address the problems. North Carolina has the roadmap on how we get to where we need to be. North Carolina has the funds in the bank to make it happen today if we wanted to. So what do we need to do to ensure our legislators spend our hard-earned tax money how we want them to spend it? They work for us after all. We elected them. I don't know about you, but that makes me wholly angry when my money, your money, to pay for the last year and this year's schools sits in the bank not being spent. I am ready to see Jesus flipping tables in the General Assembly, y'all. I can't wait. And until that day happens, it's up to us to be sure that our legislators are listening and acting on our behalf for our children's sake. Pastors for North Carolina Children has developed the initiative I mentioned earlier called Mission Amplify. It is a letter writing campaign aimed to teach people of faith how to go about contacting your legislators to speak up for our children. It teaches you how to look up who your reps are, how to get their contact information, how to be able to reach out to them. Teams from congregations are asked to write 6 times during the year, a postcard each time, one to your House rep and one to your senator. That's 12 postcards, 4 to 5 sentences apiece. This is very, very easy. We give you the asks. We give you the background information. We give you a devotional to use to make it part of a group event if you want. You can do it after church. You can do it on a Wednesday night. You can do it very flexibly. Sunday school, youth group. We've tried to make it very flexible and friendly because we need people speaking up to say that our children need our support. We need to ensure that all of our children have what they need to thrive. And Mission Amplify includes ways that children and youth can get involved, and it has a devotional, as I mentioned, and resources for every episode. I want to thank specifically Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation for the grant funding that's helped make Mission Amplify possible and has allowed us to be able to offer it free of charge this year. I have kits up here. If your congregation or your community group would like to participate, please take a kit home. If you'd like to think about it and get back to me, talk to people at your church, let me know and I will mail it to you. Please don't take it if you're not going to use it. That's my only request. But each of the episodes focuses on one of our most vulnerable children's groups and what they need to thrive. Children who are experiencing racial discrimination, especially our Black, Brown, Hispanic, Latinx, and Indigenous children. Children who come from low wealth families. Children who have disabilities. Children who are learning English or are multilingual learners. Children who live in rural areas. And children who are birthed to pre-K and need that foundational start. Our hope for Mission Amplify is that we will have teams writing from every county and every legislative district speaking up on behalf of children to flood the legislature with postcards. Our current goal is to have 30 groups sign up by May 1st. So if you think you would like to participate, I would love to talk with you more. You can indicate that on your feedback form or the QR code and provide your contact information. Just like Jesus was upset by the money changers and people selling things in the temple, taking advantage of his neighbors who were disadvantaged or who had less, our North Carolina legislators at the General Assembly are taking advantage of our children. They're taking extra advantage of our children who are already lower on the ladder rung because of the color of their skin or where they come from or their family's generational wealth, or children who just require more support. Our children are the ones who are being sacrificed, and it's time that we flip the tables in the state. It's time that we stand up and speak out and let our legislators know that we will not stand any longer for our children to be sacrificed on the altar of the state budget. We have the money. We have the roadmap. We have the ability to solve this problem. That is good news, and I have hope that we can do it. We must do better. Our legislators need to know that we're watching, that we care, and their jobs are on the line if they don't listen to us. Our attention and our voices speaking together is what will change the situation. My holy anger makes me feel the need to stand up and speak out, and I invite you to join me for our kids, for every single one of my 1.5 million children in North Carolina, because they're worth it. And how are our children? With our help, they will get what they need to flourish. I hope you'll consider joining Mission Amplify to make this vision a reality. Thank you.